Let's be honest, lithium-ion batteries are great for cell phones, laptops and other small electronic devices. They have a high power density which allows them to be small and lightweight, but can run those devices for hours. But when you start scaling them up to e-bikes, scooters and cars, you create a considerable fire risk. There is so much chemical energy wound up like a coiled spring that if they are damaged in any way, a chain reaction can start, creating a self-sustaining fire which is almost impossible to put out. You just have to let it burn. So multiply the size of an EV battery by a few thousand, and this is what we have here. Gigawatt hours of chemical energy just waiting to release itself, given half a chance. That energy has to be tightly constrained and released gradually as electricity, but the chemical reaction would much rather get rid of it as fast as possible, which is exactly what happens when something fails, resulting in the kind of catastrophic fire we see at Moss Landing. The fire is belching out tons of toxic smoke, resulting in a mass evacuation. But the key point here is that if we weren't pathologically obsessed with wind, solar and net zero, none of this nonsense would even be necessary. Welcome back to MGUY, British engineer and lawyer, now Sydney-based YouTuber. I'm closing in on 100,000 subscribers. It's getting closer by the day, which is absolutely ridiculous. Thank you so much for your support of this channel. So if you're one of the majority of my viewers who are not subscribed, please just click that subscribe button down below so you don't miss out on any future videos. And if you'd like to make a small contribution to this channel, why not buy me a coffee? Click the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen. There are plenty of other videos on YouTube about the fire itself, but I'm going to focus on why we need these vast batteries and why they are such a bad idea. Back in the good old days, the electricity grid was primarily composed of baseload generation, always on power stations either burning coal or some other fuel, or extracting heat from controlled nuclear decay to boil water to create steam to turn massive turbines which power the generators. Those generators spinning like clockwork at 3000 RPM were what gave us the 50 cycles per second alternating current electricity we get here in Australia or in the UK, or 3600 RPM and 60 cycles per second in the US. Those generators provided the constant base load generation required to meet demand. And when there were peaks in demand, other forms of generation would be switched in, like gas, which can be ramped up and down very quickly. There was no need to store electricity because it was always being generated. And this is a very good thing because electricity is incredibly difficult to store at scale. But now, in pursuit of the fictional net zero nirvana, we are closing all our reliable baseload generation and replacing it with unpredictable weather-dependent generation, primarily wind turbines and solar panels. So there won't be any always-on generation anymore. Most countries are smart enough to realise this and are building new nuclear power stations to fill the baseload gap. Except Australia, of course, because Australia is pretty much the only developed economy that has an energy policy and an energy minister running it, dumb enough to think that rainbows and unicorn farts can do the job of supporting an industrial grid alone. God help us. And unless you have enough nuclear to provide the baseload, and you have gas to cover the spikes in demand, you're going to have to store that excess electricity when and where you can, so it's available when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing. Pumped hydro is one way of achieving this, where the surplus electricity is used to pump water into an elevated reservoir, and that same water flowing down again can generate electricity when there is a shortfall. But pumped hydro is astronomically expensive and poses massive civil engineering challenges, not only in building it, but finding a suitable location for the two reservoirs. So most countries are hell-bent on building these colossal industrial-scale batteries, known as battery energy storage systems or BESS, to try and store some of the surplus electricity from wind and solar. The trouble is that the sheer size of the batteries required to provide even a few hours backup is mind-boggling. Plus, they're essentially just a chemical reaction and will degrade, just like the lithium-ion battery in your phone, and will need to be replaced every decade or so. Just imagine the scale of the mining required to continually replace gigawatt hours worth of BESS sites around the world. And so we end up in situations like this, where all that pent-up chemical energy in these huge BESS sites is given an opportunity, as a result of damage or failure of a safety system, to be released rapidly. And we get fires like this, releasing vast quantities of highly toxic chemicals into the environment.
Fire burning at one of the world's largest lithium battery storage facilities, and it continues to burn more than 24 hours after it started. Residents near the Moss Landing facility, they're still out of their homes this afternoon. ABC 7 News South Bay reporter Dustin Dorsey, he's in Castroville. And Dustin, what is the latest on conditions there?
Yeah, Larry, you can still smell a little smoke in the air right now, and as you see behind me, you can still see those flames. I'm going to see those flames at times, see that smoke certainly. I'm going to step out of the way here as we zoom in. This facility ran by Vistra Energy remains offline, but the PG&E plant next door still operating. We were here when flames flared up again a few hours ago this afternoon. This situation is far from over. After the fourth fire here since 2019, the community is searching for answers.
Best be described as a worst-case scenario of a disaster that's happened here. Nobody predicted anything on this line, and this is really a lot more than just a fire. It's really a wake-up call for this industry. There must be accountability for this, and there will be accountability.
Tempers ran about as hot as the fire that started Thursday night and continued Friday at one of the world's largest lithium battery plants. Flames could be seen from miles away, raging some 30 feet high or more. A water-based suppression system at the Vistra Energy plant failed to contain the fire at the start. Why that was, as well as the initial cause, remain under investigation.
There are still some reports I have read that are playing down the risk from the fumes, but I can tell you for a fact the smoke coming off those burning batteries would require first responders to wear breathing apparatus, containing as it does a bunch of very nasty chemicals, including hydrogen fluoride, which is literally one of the most harmful gases on the planet. And here it is being released into the environment by the ton. But don't worry, it's all perfectly safe, says the trustworthy mainstream media. It is infuriating to me that governments believe that no price is too high as long as we reach net zero. We can mine the planet to death with fossil fuels, use up our entire global reserves of copper for just one generation of wind turbines, exploit children in the Congo for the cobalt we need for our EV batteries, build these gargantuan BESS sites to try and plug the gaps in the unreliable wind and solar electricity grid, but it's all just fine as long as it takes us a few steps closer to our net zero utopia. I hope the thousands of residents evacuated from around this terrible Moss Landing fire might start to question whether it's all worth it, given the fact that China and India will continue to burn coal for decades to come, cancelling out any reductions in emissions our pathetic attempts at net zero in the West will achieve. But hey, don't hold your breath, because as we all know, the only thing that is truly net zero in the current world is common sense.